Throughout all time, storms have captivated and fascinated literature and thought. Whilst varying in size and intensity, at its worst a storm can have cataclysmic effects. This is true also of the ancient world. However, they had less means of mitigating such effects, making the damage all the more devastating. So much so that a storm may seem like a punishment sent by a higher order. This is predominantly how storms manifested in Greek literature, but what about storms lend themselves so well as being attributed to the gods? Firstly, their magnitude. There was no satellite imagery that we've become so accustomed to in the modern era. Instead, if a great storm were to arise, it would instead obscure the whole sky, bringing sinister darkness and a foreboding atmosphere, throwing a sinister shade over the ground. The clouds will physically separate the realm of the gods from humanity, as if the gods were withdrawing their support of the mortals. A storm's ability to adapt space in the tangible world of the mortals is one of the reasons why stormy imagery has remained so present. These three spatial elements are a recurring theme when describing tempests in Greek literature. The first and possibly most significant spatial element is the downwards movement of rain and lightning. In Greek understanding, the gods resided above the sky in Olympus, giving them connotations of onlookers of human behaviour, especially in Homer. The second is the darkness associated with these storms, and the last is the destructive ability of a storm, something which would seem to the mortals unjust and incomprehensible at times. As a storm is a naturally occurring phenomenon, they are explained in Hesiod's Theogony, a poem written to detail the genealogy of the gods and to accomplish the cosmos as the Greeks understood it. In his genealogy, the birth was born from the great chasm, and later in the succession Typhon was created. He is described in the poem as an immortal monster of tornadoes and winds, and was born from Gaia and Tartarus. If one accepts Hesiod's ancestry over other variations, such as the Homeric hymn to Apollo, where Typhon is only Hera's son, then it is acceptable to associate him not only as an earthly natural entity, but also as a chthonic one, whose winds rise up from below the earth, causing storms and what creates them to interact with every element of the cosmos, not just the heavens and the oceans. The word typhoon comes from the Greek word typhon, meaning whirlwind, thus affirming Typhon's association with storms. According to Hesiod, from Typhus comes the strength of the moist-blowing winds. By making Typhon the cause of uncoordinated winds, rather than the more favourably regarded cardinal winds such as Boreas, he gives the reason for storms to exist. Hesiod comments on the danger of these other breezes for mortals, creating a semantic field of explosive fury and utter destruction. It creates a sense of the fragility of human life when exposed to these elements. This theme of mortals as victims of the world around them is reflected in Herodotus, when Artabanus is explaining to Xerxes the threat the sea poses, because of the risk of storms and also the lack of harbours at open sea. We also see in Hesiod that when a storm arises, the space around it responds. The audio-sensory semantics of this passage presents a vivid image of the storm causing labour to the earth. The verb sieved connotes turbulence but also anger and intent, combined with rage to create a furious lexical set. The use of around and about are general terms showing the unpredictable nature of a storm, and there is also juxtaposition of high and low with the use of under and arose, creating two distinctive planes, one for earth and one for the immortals. Similar themes surrounding storms also emerged later in Greek tragedy. At the start of the Trojan Women by Euripides, produced in the late 5th century, opposed to the earlier 8th or 7th century narratives of Homer and Hesiod, two divinities, Athena and Poseidon, discuss how to punish the Greeks for their sacrilegious deeds at Troy. From this passage you can see that the decision is unanimous and undisputed. The Greeks will die in this merciless storm as a result of a higher order correcting their wayward morality. Just as storms were continually present, so is the gaze of the gods watching from above, watching them and prepared to act without compassion if needed. Storms in tragedy often appeared at times when Athens themselves were at risk of overstepping. This play in particular, produced in 14 BC, could allude to the Peloponnesian War and the desecration of the Hermae before the Athenians set out on their second exhibition. The divine retribution in Trojan Woman harkens to Book 5 of the Odyssey, especially with the involvement of Poseidon as a driver of the divine retribution. Again we see a storm characterized by bringing darkness, here in the form of a metaphor. This passage highlights the descent from heaven, bringing us again that downward movement of rain and lightning. The adjective rushing adds to the unexpected chaos of the scene, as a real storm was unpredictable, just as the motives of the gods were. The cardinal winds are personified, with their own identities acting in unison at the will of Poseidon. However, Homer claims that Poseidon roused every sort of wind. This could also be alluding to the more dangerous other breezes from below that we saw in Hesiod. Personification in Greek literature can be interpreted as a bid to understand the vast and incomprehensible world around them. Giving form to the formless helps to break down the phenomena into something they understood: humanity. In the early 5th century, the Athenians feared the arrival of their own storm, the Persians. Pindar's Pythian Ode 6, published in 490 BC, 10 years before the Second Persian invasion of Greece commenced and Athens fell, Pindar describes a figurative storm that comes from abroad like a relentless army. Given the time of its publication, it is logical to assume that this storm alludes to the uncertainty of Persian invasion, or even the calm before the storm, as they were expecting invasion and political tensions rose. The previous passage shows that storms can be figurative devices rather than divine. But why do storms make good metaphors? They make great metaphors because of all the uncertainties of their nature. Storm imagery often connotes peaks and troughs of chaos and calm within a narrative. A storm can represent a period of hardship, which is where we get the popular idiom, waiting for the storm to pass. This very notion is why storms make great plot devices, as they are temporary, and all the confusion that they bring to the space and the senses of those who encounter them will end, and progression can be made. There must be turmoil in order for a hero to emerge. Metaphors of this nature are present in both tragedy and epic. A popular image created by metaphor is the idea of finding a port in a storm, meaning to find safety after more perilous times. This is best represented in Euripides' Andromache, to describe the salvation of the women from their times of hardship. This imagery is especially impactful towards the end of the play. Both Andromache and Hermione find their shelter in the men who come to their rescue. First Peleus, who saves Andromache and her son from being killed by Menelaus, and then later Hermione, who fears the consequences of her actions may lead to her husband, Neoptolemus, killing her. The imagery used by Euripides echoes the warning of Artabanus in Herodotus' Histories, which was published approximately 12 years prior to this play. In all, storms in Greek literature were almost always linked with divine connotations. Their gods were larger than life and everlasting. It made sense for them to be behind something as incomprehensible as a hurricane or tropical storm. They could also be used figuratively to portray the narrative of a growing population and reflect the issues more local to the Greeks, such as invasion and moral commentary.